everybody. I'm so honored and thrilled to be here with Naomi Krupitsky. She wrote this month's Read with Jenna book. It's called The Family. I can't get it in the screen though, because I haven't learned to use Zoom quite yet, but I just am thrilled to be here with all of you and with Naomi. She is an incredible writer. This book, I've heard from so many of you all who have read this book with us about how these characters have stayed with all of you long after we have closed the pages of this incredible debut novel. And so Naomi, I just want to thank you so much for joining us today and to dig into this beautiful, beautiful book.
Jenna, thank you so much. I mean, thank you to Barnes & Noble for having us here. Thank you for picking this book. It has been just such an incredible honor to get to connect with everybody who this book has reached because of you.
Oh, that's so sweet. And I chose it because I have never read anything like it. To see the mafia, for a lack of a better word, through the female gaze was just something that I thought we needed. You know, it was like there was this lack in all of the stories that I'd either read or, of course, like seen on television, like many of you all. But to see about female ambition or female thoughts through these characters, these two best friends, was something that I just loved. And I wonder, and I know we have tons of audience questions, and please feel free to send me your questions. We're going to be taking your questions as we talk. But how did this idea come to you? So
the first image that I got was of Sophia and Antonia. So Sophia and Antonia grow up together. Their apartments share a wall. And I imagined these two sort of polar opposite little girls growing up together in Brooklyn. That came to me. Actually, they started in the Bronx. It was going to be Arthur Avenue, but it ended up moving to Brooklyn. And then at the same time, I knew how I wanted the book to end. The book ends in this very climactic, a little bit violent, sort of huge way. And I had to get those two little girls to that ending. And so the world sort of filled itself in, and eventually it felt like the book had been waiting there the whole time. There was no other way I could have done it. But I wanted these two little girls to stay together for their whole lives. They come together and sort of fall apart the way that friends do. And I wanted them to live the lives they would need to live to get to this intense ending.
Yeah, I mean, and I can't even, so there's a lot of you that are joining us today, and we're going to talk about the ending, I think, because most everybody's read this incredible book. But to get from the two little girls playing and, you know, with their mothers and to that ending seems complicated. And in fact, this book took you a long time to write. Is it true that you first started writing it in 2015 or finished it? When did you wrote it in 2015, right?
I started a short story so I went to a reading last night by Kyle Licia Wu, whose debut came out the same day as mine. I went to her reading here, and she said, I started this book as a collection of short stories because I didn't want to admit that I was writing a novel. And that's very much what happened to me. I was like, okay, it's a short story. It's a short story about two little girls. It's going to be fine. I started that in 2015. I sold the book in 2018, and
the book did not. If I read that book, would I recognize this book? I mean, I guess recognize.
You would recognize the family. You would recognize the characters, but you wouldn't know them as well. And so that's a huge part of the work that I did with my editor. And the book takes place over a shorter amount of time. So you know them better now. Sophia and Antonia are the center in a way that when I sold the book, we knew a lot more about their parents. We knew a lot more about their children. And the action of the book really descended through the generations. So the ending of the book involved their children instead of them. So it was really different.
So did it go far? Was the timeline when you first wrote it, when did it end?
It ended in the late 50s. So Their children are teenagers.
Okay.
And It's interesting when you're editing a book and you're editing it so much, and the people in it so well. I cut things that were good and that I loved and that felt like part of the story. Um, and I miss them even as I can see that this is the book that wanted to come out the whole time.
Yeah, and I feel like that's the really incredible writers that I get to talk with, which is just such a privilege. The editing process is the most important part of the entire writing process for so many, right? Because even though you're letting go of really beautiful sentences, it, this book is incredible, and it maybe needed to get rid of other things to get to this point. So,
Absolutely.
talk about your writing process. So many people had questions on how you work, how long it typically. I mean, this is your debut novel.
Yeah.
You wrote poetry previously as well, but talk a little bit about the process of writing the family.
So I wrote The Family over the course of like the second half of my 20s, basically. During that time, I lived several different places. I lived in Providence, Rhode Island, where my partner was doing a master's degree. I lived in New York, which is where I had lived before that. I traveled a lot, and I tried to make time every day to write. So for me, what works is regiment.
Mhm.
I wake up and it's the first thing I do, and preferably I like don't look at anybody or talk to them or hear them or like think about them or know that anybody exists. Because I don't know how it feels after you've written a first book, but for me, I feel like I spent so much of this time not knowing if what I was doing was real. It was just this thing that I was doing on my computer in my spare time. And I had to sort of trick myself into paying attention to it. I also couldn't pay attention to anything else, but I had to be able to be in the world. And for me, that meant letting go of the rest of the world that I was living in.
Yes.
Um, and
That's
just
kind
doing
of
it every
tricky,
day.
right? Like, how did you do that? I mean, is it true? Because I read this, I confirmed it, but I don't see it in these notes. You were a bookseller in San Francisco. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah. So I've been working as a bookseller in San Francisco for the last 2 years. So more over the course of the editing process than the
Okay.
initial drafting process.
Okay.
And that's been really cool. That's really opened up my eyes to the fiction that's being published right now in a way that I didn't have that context when I was writing. And I don't know that I could have written with that context. I think I have to like take a step back now if I'm going to get into a different world again.
Yeah, it's interesting because sometimes when I'm reading a book, I find myself writing like I'm just writing for TV or for in my journal or whatever. And I'm like, this sounds like Naomi, like you can find yourself
Oh,
kind of writing
oh,
like other people. And that's why, if you want to be a writer, everybody says read all the great books because
yes.
you're studying the art. And you studied creative writing, is that right? Is this something you've always wanted to do?
When I was two and I was shown my first book, I looked at it and I said, "What is that? I would like to make one." It's always been the thing, but I think primarily I've always loved to read. And I think that's true for a lot of the writers that I really respect that I've heard talk about their motivations is that books have always been sort of their favorite place to go. And I wanted to I think I want in some deep way to contribute to the world that has been such a huge part of my life.
Yeah, so how have books I think everybody sort of has a different relationship. Some people need books to travel or need books for companionship. What's been your relationship with
Hmm.
reading?
I think a less interesting but true answer is all of the above. They've been sort of consolation. They've been escape. When when I was little, I would read books so fast that my parents would quiz me on them before I was allowed to return to the
Because
library
they
because they
didn't
didn't
believe
believe
you?
exactly. And I just devoured them. And I think if I think about what I'm interested in when I'm writing, I think that books are a way that I got to know the world around me and that I got to build empathy for people that were different than me and worlds that were different than me. And the books that have really changed my life are often about lives that are really different from mine. and getting an insight into the way that you can get into somebody's head in a book is different than the way that you can get to know somebody in any other art form. And so I think that's it for me. It makes the world bigger. It makes me feel more connected and also more expansive myself.
Mhm. That was very beautifully said. Thank you guys for sending your questions and answers. I'm going to at some point try to figure out how to find them. And we will take all of those towards the end of this evening's program. But so you had the image of these two little girls. You knew that you wanted the world to revolve around them. Are you interested in the mafia? Were you interested? I mean, now you are, but back then when you just started the genesis of this book, was it something you were inspired by? Do you have knowledge of it? Why set these two little girls who could be really in any world in that one?
So the mafia came to me as sort of a natural, at first, as sort of a natural way to get these girls to this violent ending. But if I investigate what's actually interesting about it, yes, I've always been interested in the mafia because it's exciting as a something that as a culture we have a collective understanding of the mafia. And I am really interested in what that collective understanding is. So I didn't have to say the word mafia in this book because
Yeah.
you know what it
So
is.
you never
And
said it. And in fact, I feel like I'm using the wrong word. I guess I should say the family.
you're using, so from what I understand from my research, you're using the right word. Mafia is the original word, or the word that people use now to refer to organized crime that comes out of Sicily.
Mhm.
So when we say, like, Japanese mafia or Jewish mafia, that's kind of a misnomer because mafia
Mhm.
actually refers specifically to Sicilian
Mhm.
organized crime, although it's in the United States and it's ever evolving. So anyway, I can get really deep into these little specific things now. What I love about the mafia is that it operates in our culture as something that we all understand already, like a myth or a legend. We bring our own assumptions about it. And so it was this really, really fertile place for me to sort of do a retelling. So along with creative writing, one of the things I always studied and loved was classics and mythology. And so I think I look at this as a retelling of a myth. And I engage with it that way, the way that I engage with it by trying to sort of turn over or uncover something new about a story that we all already feel familiar with. And I think that familiarity is something that readers connect with. Like, you open the book and you read a few pages and you go, oh, I know something about this story. And that helps get you in. And then hopefully what the book does is investigate that a little bit, challenge a little bit the assumptions that readers are bringing to it.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and let's talk a little bit about that because I loved how you explore all of these families. Like, it's not cartoonish by any means. It's not stereotypical. You write about the good and the bad, the things that are hard to take. The violence, the anger. Um, but you also show this family that really loves each other. And I've realized, like, almost every book I've ever chosen has this kind of side where there's a character where you're like, I shouldn't like this character, but I do. And I think that's the sign of a really beautiful, well thought out book. But that's something that was intentional, obviously, right? I mean, there's the beauty, the loyalty, the family, and then there's also the difficult parts about being part of this family.
I definitely want you to love these characters.
Mhm.
I maybe the primary thing that I want for readers to do is to love these characters, because I think that if you love somebody, you can not necessarily forgive them all their faults, but you grow by getting to know a complex other person. So I want
Mhm.
you to love Joey Colicchio, who's the patriarch, kind of
Mhm.
the closest to a mob boss that we get to know. I want
Mhm.
you to see him being a tender father and, like,
Yes.
doing his best for his family. And making the best choices that he can to take care of the people that he loves. And I want you to see his logic and kind of go along with him and go like, yes, this seems like the only thing you could do. And then I want you to see him like punch a man so hard in the face that his cheek splits open, and have to confront that people are complicated. And in no way do I feel like I'm either making an argument for punching people in the face, or saying that like, if you punch someone in the face, like I don't feel like I'm drawing a conclusion. I'm saying that people are complicated, and that that's the only and the most interesting, and it's a way to get to know people.
Pamela, I hear you. It seems so some of us have not finished the book, and that's okay. We're not judging you. There's somebody else that just got it today. So we will not tell the ending, which that always gets people really mad one way or the other, Naomi. I don't know what to tell you, but I'd hate ruining endings of books for people. So if one person asked me to not talk about it, we won't, but we can still talk about everything else. And I think you'll enjoy it. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I try not to spoil an ending.
Right.
You know, I like to read, and I wrote this book. I certainly don't want to ruin the ending for you. So
okay.
we'll talk around it. But I'm not spoiling it by saying it ends in a climax.
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
And no,
and that's fine.
Yes. This is a really good question. Pamela, of course. This was a good question, and it was one that I was going to ask, because I was also probably not in the same way you were, because I'm sure you studied mythology in like college. But Laura Dimes wants to know, what specific myth were you thinking of when you wrote this book? And because I loved mythology when I was younger too, I remember that. Did you ever have that book of all the mythology that was like, we got it from the library and we would read the different myths? I feel like you're
Layers.
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So anyway, was there a specific myth that you were trying to reference when you write this?
So when I studied mythology, one of the things that I loved about it was reading modern retellings. So C.S. Lewis has one that I love. Obviously, Madeline Miller has really, really popular ones that are just beautiful. They're all over the place now. But more than a specific myth, I think of the mafia as a myth.
Yes.
Right? So that's the myth. The myth is these guys that you know what they do, but you don't really know what they do. You know they exist, but they would never admit they exist. They're violent, they're loving, they have this sense of honor and integrity, and sort of fierceness and loyalty. And I think that's the myth. That's the understanding that we all bring.
You wanted to bring some more nuance and understanding to what it would look like.
Yes.
And when I recommend this book, not only on television, but to my boss or to friends or whoever, what I loved so much about it was, to me, and you have to correct me if I'm wrong, and I've referenced this a little earlier in the conversation, but this is the first book that I've ever read that had the mafia story told through a female perspective. Mm-hmm. Is that true?
It's the only one that I've ever read either.
Yeah.
But I definitely took inspiration from women in mafia shows and books who I felt like were incredible characters. Adriana in The Sopranos is an incredible character. She's amazing. She's doing her best. And she loves this man, and she's like navigating that. And Carmela Soprano, I actually also think, is an amazing character. And she has this tension between the family that she came from and the family that she joined, and she fights back and she protects her family. But I wanted to really like honor the work that these women are doing. So both honor women's work. So honor the incredible power and work of having children and holding a family together, but then also give these women the true complicated nature that women and people have. So they kind of want power, some of them, and they're complicated, they're angry, they're scared, and they're figuring out how to navigate that. And I wanted to just make them as as real as possible for people that you make up in your head.
Yeah. And what I thought was so interesting is that these two best friends were always different, right? Like from the time they were little, you write about their differences, but as they become women, I feel like every woman that I know has some sort of different thing. One loves being a mother, one doesn't love being a mother as much. One wants a job, And what was cool, and talk to me about how you did this, because my grandmothers were, around their ages. I'm trying to do the math on that, but I'm nearly positive. And so during the World War II, maybe slightly younger, but anyway, the point is there wasn't much conversation around female ambition then. And so some of the thoughts that these characters have aren't even fully, like, it isn't like, they say, in their mind, they're a little conflicted about what they want too. So how did you do this? How did you research this time period and what it would mean to have language around female power, female ambition, some dissatisfaction of what was required from women then?
Yeah. I think that when historical fiction is at its strongest, it gives us real people that we relate to, that we feel like are full, not necessarily contemporary, but complex people that we understand, even though the book takes place in a different time period. And when historical fiction is not at its strongest, it makes us feel like, oh, people were just different back then. And so what I wanted to do was to figure out how these women could have complex wants, and desires, and, like you say, language for what they want in a time when they wouldn't have been given that. So I, for example, feel like I was brought up in a time where I have language for the things that I want, but I wanted to consider that that's not true. Like, what do I want that I don't have language for yet? What am I dissatisfied about that maybe my children or their children will know how to express? And I think it's a little bit of a sidebar, but it's so relevant. It was the main thing that I took from watching sort of the unfolding of the Me Too movement was women who were seeing all of this stuff come out, and they were looking back on their own experiences, and they were saying, I had experiences like that, but we didn't have the language to determine whether or not it was okay or whether or not it was traumatic. We didn't have the word trauma. We didn't have the word harassment. So we had no way of navigating that. And I wanted to give Sophia and Antonia full human complex desires in a time where they really had to figure out how to even speak what they wanted, and how to be ambitious, and want power and want change and want something different from what their parents had. And I also wanted them to, like, love their families. Like, they love their kids, they love being parents, and that's not mutually exclusive with wanting power.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the other thing is when we look at their mothers and how complicated both of their roles were, and not only, and I think we can speak a little bit about this, but, not only because one loses a husband, that happens pretty early in the book. And I think it's probably on the back,
I think it's out there.
Okay, it's out there. So we know that is, and I think I said it on TV, but that's the catalyst for everything, right? That's what, that one moment changes both of these girls forever, of course, as it would, but when it tests the loyalty of the family, when one of the mothers can't live without the family, but really can't live with them. So I think their mothers too have such interesting roles in how they shape the girls, which is how we all are shaped. Do you want to talk a little bit about developing those women?
Yeah. So I also conceived of Sophia and Antonia's mothers. Their names are Lena and Rosa. I conceived of them as being best friends too. And what I wanted to do with them, I think, was, first of all, I wanted to give some context for Sophia and Antonia and sort of how they were formed.
Mhm.
And I also, I wanted to just keep sort of investigating like how women ended up in this family, and why and what they wanted once they were there. And um, I wanted to explore what the limits of female power might have looked like in this time period and in this
Mhm.
context. So after Antonia's father dies, Antonia's mother, the power that Antonia's mother finds is in leaving the family, as which she can't do because
Yeah.
she is dependent on them financially
Yes.
and emotionally. But in just going like, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm not doing women's work. I'm not doing the dishes. I'm not waking up at a time. I'm done. I was told that these rules and that this convention of like, brushing my hair would protect me, and it didn't, and I'm done. Whereas Sophia's mother really, I think, digs in to the
Mhm.
choices she's made and
Mhm.
to the ways that she thinks those choices are protecting her family and the people she loves.
Mhm. It's so the mom, I mean, I feel like both of their mothers, and one of the reasons why I loved this book so much is that you really develop the characters. Like it's a character study, and those are my favorite types of books. So that then when you're thinking about the themes of female ambition or seeing a story through a different gaze, you care, you really care. And you did just such a beautiful job. I'm going to start asking some of these other questions because I cannot believe we've been talking for 30 minutes, but I am losing my voice. So, okay. Ashley Baker has a great question. She wants to know, as you were writing, did any of the characters surprise you? And I know that we know that you knew what the ending was, but I think in sort of the narrative arc, did you know in advance what they would do, or did it just come as you went?
I had no idea. And for me, at least in the writing of this novel, not knowing was what kept me interested in writing. I
Mhm.
think some writers really outline, they know exactly what they're going
Yes.
to do in each
Mhm.
paragraph. And my editor would probably say that outlining would help me. And I'm sure she is right. Um, but I need to be surprised. I need to not know exactly what's going to happen from day to day and over the course of a character's life. I have sort of vague ideas of how I want, what their challenges are, and what I want them to work toward overcoming or fighting back against. But I was surprised every day.
I mean, that makes it so much fun. Who was your favorite? Anissa wanted to know. Thank you, Anissa, for joining. She's one of the most loyal Read with Jenna members. She wanted to know who was your favorite character to write, and then who was the hardest character to write.
So we haven't talked about Saul at all, but
Oh,
I love
Saul. Let's
Saul.
get into Saul. Tell us a little bit about Saul.
So
And you
Saul,
actually, is it true that you had some experience in I read a note somewhere that like you sort of knew somebody like Saul who would come over.
oh,
Is that
so
true?
okay, so Saul is a Jewish refugee from Germany. He joins the book in the second half, and he becomes really important. He becomes sort of the catalyst for the ending, and he makes them all question their values, the values that they thought were inherent. And I loved writing Saul. And I have family who came from Poland to escape World War II. My great grandmother came here with one of her other sisters. And you can't, I've read so many books about World War II that do a an amazing, incredible job of engaging with the history, or a job that I don't connect with and I don't like engaging with the history. But I felt like I couldn't write a book that took place in this time period without engaging with that history. And especially because it's a book about immigrants in some way, and Saul comes under really different circumstances than the families, than Sophia and Antonia's families. And so I wanted to sort of compare the immigrant experience there, and get to complicate the ideas we might bring to a book about what makes a good immigrant, which already I think with the crime family you're sort of complicating.
Well, and is that historically, I mean, I'm sure it is. I don't think you would have included it if it wasn't, but during this time period in the 40s, and the 50s, 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, would any nationality be welcomed into the mafia? And was that something that happened? And how did you do your research? That was a lot of people wanted to know about that as well.
So there are many part of it is that this is the New York Mafia. And in
Yeah.
New York, your family consists of many different nationalities. That's just how it works to live there. I think it's possible to live in New York and not engage with any other nationalities, but I think it's much more likely that you end up in a neighborhood where there's Hasidic Jews on one side of the street and Irish and Italian immigrants on the other, and you have a block party every year. And this is a story that somebody just told me, so I know that it happened. It's a remarkable place in that way.
Mm-hmm.
But also there's lots of documented cases of Italian mafia families, not like incorporating Jews into the fold in quite the same way, but having really strong alliances with other nationalities, other ethnicities.
Mm-hmm.
Many of the most famous, like Meyer Lansky is the most famous, I think, Jewish mafia character that we know, and his friends were Italian and Irish, and they all lived in the Lower East Side, which is Italian and Irish and Jewish. So that mixture definitely existed. The main research that I did for this book was reading fiction. I definitely did some more traditional reading nonfiction, Wikipedia kind of stuff. But what made this book good, I think, or what made a believable sense of New York, a believable fictional world, a believable cultural landscape, was reading fiction. So I read fiction by Italian Americans. I read fiction that takes place in New York. I just tried to immerse myself in the world that I was contributing to as much
Were
as
there
possible.
any other mafia books that you loved that you would recommend? A lot of people want to know what you've read recently that you love. So, I mean, we could save that to the end. I usually do, but were there books while you were researching the family that you really connected with?
So, this is not a mafia book, but Christ in Concrete by Pietro Di Donato. It came out, I believe, in the 40s. It's a really classic book in Italian American literature, and it's about this family. And I won't give too much of away because, like many great books, it's just about the family. That's what it's about. And just their immigrant experience. And the writing is beautiful, and the spirit of the culture just seeps through the pages. And I took a lot of sort of emotional, a lot of sort of setting from that book, a lot of like the cadence of speech and the way that I wanted rooms to feel when characters entered them. That was a big, big inspiration.
And Brooklyn is like a character in this novel, right? I mean, it's so atmospheric, which I've also realized I love. Almost all the books that I choose are atmospheric. But did you started it in the Bronx, you said earlier, why you decide Brooklyn, and why did, in this case, these are questions that other people are asking, so let me credit them. I have them too, but Rachel wants to know, you set this in 1930s and 40s Brooklyn. And this is a really good question. So why? A lot of people wanted to know why Brooklyn, why the time period. And Rachel's question is great. Do you believe that type of bond that Sophia and Antonia have could be forged in a present day setting, with like in the way that we live with social media, et cetera? It's a good question.
That's a really interesting question. And I will say that social media is not an insignificant part of the reason that I choose to write about other time periods. In terms of Brooklyn, I don't even remember the evolution, but it ended up being the right place to set the story. And I think in retrospect that that's because Brooklyn was itself kind of coming of age at this time. Brooklyn's younger than Manhattan. There have been people there for many thousands of years. There have been settlers there for several hundred years, not as long as they have been in Manhattan. And so before the Brooklyn Bridge was built, which is before this book takes place, it was more like little different farmy kind of settlements. It was ever evolving. And I wanted the setting to feel like a living place. And if you've ever been to New York, you know that it feels like a living character, something that you're in relationship with, not just a place that you are. And so I couldn't help setting this book in such a vibrant time in history and such a vibrant place.
I also love that these girls, you knew their lives were going to be evolving with like the stroke of your pencil with every word, right? So I love that their lives, because they were young and changing, would also match the setting. I think that's poetic and beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely wanted them to grow up as Brooklyn did. And as for their bond and whether it could happen today, yes, because I think I am an optimist. I don't always think I'm an optimist, but about this, I think I'm an optimist. Um, Social media has not been where I have had my most meaningful human interactions. And but I think that people are still connecting with each other in the world. And I think that in the way that Sophia and Antonia are sort of isolated from their peers, I think that isolation would be, if anything, magnified by social media. Um, so I think it could happen today, but I was, you know, I didn't mind setting this book in a time where that kind of technological connection wasn't a part of the story.
I mean, it was their bond is beautiful, and I agree with you. I mean, I have friends. We're not in the mafia, but I have friends that I adore in the way that they adored each other and needed each other. Um, what? So here's another question that I think is really interesting. I think her name is Aizu Tam, and she wanted to know what's your view on handling family issues and disputes for societies, like and I think maybe you've already addressed this with sort of that you wanted to show the whole person. I mean, does that make sense? Can you answer that question, or do you feel like you already have?
I mean, I guess handling family issues and disputes
I
for
know it's a very, I
societies.
know, and the
It sounds
problem
like
is,
such an interesting question, and I'm just like not quite figuring out which part
I
of
know,
it.
and the problem is when you just have type questions, I can't expand on it any more than that.
All right, I will
Um,
take a guess here, and I will say that I am not advocating that you punch somebody in the face to settle a dispute in society. I am advocating for personal interaction rather than interaction with big faceless groups of people who you don't understand. So there's one conversation in the book about the idea of war versus protecting your family. A war being like a faceless thing that people in power decide is going to happen and that there isn't very much personal connection to necessarily, versus decisions you might have to make that you might be sort of morally iffy that you make because you're protecting people you love. And for me, that was a way that I was growing when I was reading this. And that was an idea that I was exploring. And that was a way that I was challenging my own moral compass, which might have been like, I'm a pacifist, like do nothing. But you can't necessarily be a pacifist when you're engaging with World War II or when you're engaging with the way that people in power will take advantage of that power at the expense of other people.
um, a lot of people want to know, and I hate asking this question because I feel like it always lets people down, but will there be a sequel?
Well,
Usually the answer is always no, and it kind of breaks readers' hearts.
so the reason, I don't know why everybody answers no. The reason that I would answer no to this is because I need a break from this world because I've been in it for so long. But there's a lot of material that I didn't put in this book. I know their children really well. I wouldn't count it out in like a Margaret Atwood does the sequel to Handmaid's Tale 30 years later kind of a way. But I'm very much hoping to immerse myself in a very different world next time.
Okay, so are you writing now? That's a question that a lot of people have asked. Um, are you working on a new novel? I'm like, can scroll back up, but a lot of people wanted to know that.
I am still coming out of this one. I was working on this one like right up until the wire, and I'm still coming to terms with the fact that, or I mean, and I mean in a good way. It's a
Yeah.
relief, but the fact that I can exit this world, but I haven't gotten into a new one yet.
And what does it feel like? What does it feel like? First of all, you hit the New York Times bestseller list with your first novel. What does it feel like to hear from people? Because I feel like, a lot of you write in silo, and you work with an editor. But to hear that so many people loved this book, connected with it, what have you heard from people, and how does it feel?
Connecting with people who have read the book is the best part of this whole process. It wouldn't come naturally to me to be on a public stage, which I'm sure is something that many writers can empathize with.
Yeah.
But the exposure that you and that Barnes and Noble and that New York Times, that all of these accolades represent actual human people who have read the book and who have connected to it. And I've gotten notes from people who say they love the characters, and people who stayed up all night reading it, and a couple rude comments that I ignored, and just like getting to like start to feel the way that the book is its own thing in the world that's impacting other people's lives, just the way that so many books have impacted mine. That's the best part of this whole process.
A lot of people I want to read some of these comments to you. And so many people have just said how much they loved the book. Somebody said they purchased it the other day and they've already finished it. A lot. Okay. So, and then Diane, a lot of people want to know if you will talk about the ending, if we let others go, we could maybe do that. But let me just see if there's anything else that I wanted to get to. We've answered most of these questions, but one thing that people continue to write, and this is a question I have to ask all the time, which is, will this be some sort of film, some sort of movie? A lot of people want to know who you want to play Sophia and Antonia. Is that something, or a television show? Is that something you'd like?
So I'm excited about the whatever film version of this ends up evolving. It's actually out on submission now, so people are reading it, and I'm talking to people about it, and it's really exciting. I really like adaptations, so I'm so excited to see what
Would
somebody
you
else
ever
brings
write
to
for
this world.
adaptations? I'm asking for a friend. Would you ever write screenplays?
I have never. And right now I kind of want to leave this world, but I want to be involved. I want to be like somebody you springboard ideas off of. And I haven't ruled it out, but I'm not like dying to write the screenplay, which I think some people are.
Yeah, it's interesting though, because it does lend itself so well to something. Do you have a character? Do you have any actresses you'd like to play these characters? That we heard that from several people.
So in order to write this book, I have to have my own images of them. It's like
Me
one of the
too.
things, right? I can't.
I mean, I didn't
cannot.
write this book, but in order to read the book, I had to have my own image, and it's not a real person. It's not like I imagine somebody.
Right. So that's one of the things I'm excited about, is seeing it visually through somebody else's eyes, but I don't have ideas for that.
Can you leave us with some book recommendations, some books that you've loved over your whole life or the last couple of years? Leave us with some things that if people
Yes.
go to their Barnes and Noble or their local, wherever they buy their books, they can purchase some of these.
All right. Because I work at a bookstore, you can't see, surrounded right now by towers of beautiful books. So I can tell you the ones that I've been recommending this week include Matrix by Lauren Groff, which is again.
It's so funny. I interviewed her too, and she loved myths too. She studied. She was actually was a Renaissance person. But when you were talking, I was like, she and Lauren would be friends.
That's my greatest dream.
Well, I will
So,
set you up with her on a Zoom as a friendship, but you remind me of her. It's so funny that you say that, but okay. The
well,
Matrix,
she,
thank you.
she gives me hope that I'll write again, actually. Like her writing is so alive and so exciting and so immersive that I'm like, great, there's more out there.
There
I
is more out
loved
there.
reading that. I just read Ruth Ozeki's new book, The Book of Form and Emptiness. It's beautiful. It makes me feel like more empathy for the world around me. Um, I've had to read funny things like to distract myself from pub week. So I actually read Dune the week that my book came out, um, which like, I know this isn't necessarily like the audience, but Dune is great. Dune has cool women in it. Dune is like adventurous. I mean, you don't have to put it on the top of your list, but it's very good. Um, I just read and loved. I mentioned earlier in the conversation Kyle Lucia Wu. Her book came out on the same day as mine. It's beautiful. It's a coming of age story about a biracial woman who works as a nanny in New York City. And if you've ever worked as a nanny, you will see yourself in this book. So I loved that.
Wait, what's the name of it again?
The name of it is Win Me Something,
Mm-hmm.
and it just came out. I loved Jhumpa Lahiri's new book, Whereabouts. I feel like it was quiet, but it's so beautiful. And she sees people. She sees the little emotional fluctuations that happen just in your everyday interactions so clearly. And she writes them with this restraint that I really admire as somebody who has to go back and like delete half my sentences after I've written. Um, I I could go on and I happily will, but
No,
I'm
those were
always
some
reading.
great recommendations. Me too, and thank you. I always want recommendations. I feel like everybody does. Okay, I feel guilty because I feel like half the people want a little bit of a conversation around the ending, and I feel like we should give that to them.
Great.
So let's go ahead. Anybody, thank you all so much. If you have not finished the book, for joining us, and you will give you a couple seconds to leave. Because I do feel like for all those that read this, the ending of this book is powerful, and also there a lot of people were like, wait, okay, I and again, I hope everybody's gone. See, I always feel bad because I don't want to be the spoiler alert, but
But you've said it now. Like if you don't want to hear about the ending,
okay, they're
close
gone.
the Zoom with our
Goodbye.
blessing.
Okay, well then I'm gonna go for an actual question that somebody had, and it's I have Cavalier 2 at I have Cavalier 2 said, okay, I loved the ending, and many people wrote in your comments today too that the ending was so powerful. It's the best part of the book. But I have Cavalier 2 was like, did both of the women survive? She
Oh.
wanted to make sure.
Oh, yes. Yes. They're both there. Bad guys gone. Women are still there. Women are great. Women are going to have to deal with the
So is
ramifications of
that,
murder.
did you knew at the end you wanted this friendship or this friend to be the one that helps the other, to
What
be the
I
one that's
knew when I started writing was that I wanted the death that happens to happen. So I knew that I wanted it to be this final scene in this like empty abandoned yard. It's starting to rain and he's dead. That's what I knew.
you
That was
didn't
it.
know how Antonia and Sophia
No.
had.
And a lot of how that final action unfolded during my edits. How do we connect this exciting, suspenseful action plot to these characters that we love so much? How do we make them the main drivers of this? How do we make it so that they're the center the whole time?
Well, what I really loved about the ending is that because this is a story told through the female perspective, and so many of the stories we probably read, I mean, you're younger than I am, but we're similar ages, when we were younger, was the man saving the woman. And there
Sure.
was something really beautiful about the women not needing, the women saving themselves, the women saving each other. And I think that, metaphorically, that's what a good friendship is. That's what women do for each other all the time. So was that I know you just saw the man dead in the warehouse, but when you were leading up to that, was it important that that's how it ended?
It was important to me that Sophia and Antonia both confront the parts of themselves that had been holding them back. So for Antonia, that's this sort of timidity or this like fearfulness, this quietness, this unwillingness to step into the spotlight. And for Sophia, it's a little bit like her refusal to rely on other people, her determination, her sort of stubbornness, her impulsiveness. But you know, Sophia's complicated, and in the end, she both needs saving and she's trying to save someone else. So,
yes, exactly.
So I wanted
but I mean,
them.
but the point is, she wouldn't need saving if she wasn't trying to save somebody she loved.
Exactly.
Like she acted as though, as her father probably would have, you know what I mean? She acted as though, as the boss, you know, she did what anybody would have done, but probably, I just loved that part of it. And I loved that these friends, the other thing that I loved about the book is how they wove in and out of each other's lives, which made it a realistic, lovely friendship, you know, one that we can all relate to. It wasn't just linear.
Well, I'm glad. I wanted it to be, I mean, I definitely wanted that to be true. And I have some lifelong friendships, but I've also had many really, really powerful friendships that were powerful for a short amount of time and then ended. And that it's almost like, I mean, friendships are how I learned to be in a relationship for sure. It's almost like it's like more intense than having a sibling or a partner when you're young and you have a best friend like that. And I wanted to sort of see what it would be like if the relationship did stand the test of time. So what happens if you don't have the option of just like not really talking to each other anymore because you live next door and your families are totally intertwined and you're actually dependent on each other in other ways.
Well, Naomi, thank you so much. I hope all of you will join us. Naomi will be on the show next Tuesday, right?
The next
2
Tuesday.
weeks, 2 weeks from today. And we will be having another conversation on our Read with Jenna Instagram. I hope you guys will follow us and join along. Naomi, I just loved this book. I give it to everybody. I think it is so well done. I know that you will be a force in literature to come. I cannot wait, and no pressure to read what you're going to write next. I know it will be powerful and incredible, and that the characters will stay with me always, like these women and their families. So thank you so very much.
Jenna, thank you so much. Thank you for this interesting conversation. Thank you so much for your like thoughtful engagement with this book, and obviously for all of the incredible exposure and all of the readers that it has reached because of you. I'm so grateful. So thank you.
Thank you. I can't wait to see you on the show, and thank you all for joining us this evening. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, guys.